This is the laboratory interpretation guide for the Destiny Well Men's Hormone Profile. At Destiny Well, we define laboratory ranges in a sophisticated way. We use the standard ranges, represented by the blue bar here, from each reference lab that does a particular test to define the lab high and the lab low. If you have thyroid test results that are too low based on the lab's formal norm, then you have a diagnosis of lab low thyroid function or hypothyroidism. Similarly, for glucose, if you have a lab high blood sugar of over 126 on 2 occasions, then you meet the formal diagnosis criteria for diabetes. That's needed to make a medical diagnosis. But at Destiny Well, we think that there can be a lot more nuance. We believe that there's often an optimal range based on what we've found going forward helps people to live the healthiest lives, to be the healthiest, and to avoid disease. We triangulate this with the medical literature, with other people's standards, with our clinical practice experience, and all the different data points we can get, so we can come up with what we believe is optimal for a particular test result. Destiny Well also, in the red bars here, will define a Destiny Well high and a Destiny Well low. These may or may not line up exactly with a laboratory high or low, because sometimes we think that the range can be higher or lower, or that it needs to be different. And in between the optimal and the green bar and the low and the high in the red bars, we have orange zones for moderately high and moderately low. They're not quite optimal, but they're not in the high or low zone. I want to go over something complicated but extremely interesting and important about your hormones. It's called the steroidogenic pathways, and it shows how the major sex steroid hormones as well as your cortisol are closely interrelated, and factors that lead from one pathway to the other, and how these can influence the levels of the active hormones that you have in your system. We'll talk a little bit about the overview, and then to break it down, we'll go into separate diagrams of how cortisol is produced, what happens with the estrogen hormones, and what happens with the androgens like testosterone. It all starts with cholesterol. If you don't have enough cholesterol, you don't have enough precursors to make your hormones. And so people who take extremely strong cholesterol medicines, they're very sick, or they have very low cholesterol, they may not have enough precursor to make all the molecules they need. And subsequently, their cortisol may be low, or their estrogen and testosterone levels may end up low, affecting their overall well-being. So it starts with cholesterol, and that's converted into pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the first of the sex-related steroid hormones, and it's a precursor hormone as well. Some of that goes to the hormone progesterone, which is much more common in higher doses in women, and that's important for different phases of the menstrual cycle, but it's also important for brain function and healing in both genders. Next, we'll go into how that turns into cortisol, how it turns into the estrogen hormone group, and how it turns into androgen or male-related testosterone group hormones separately in the next section. Cortisol is a key hormone. It's a life and death hormone. When you're stressed, when you're chased by a lion, when things are desperate in your life, then you make more cortisol. You're in a car accident, you have a heart attack, your body needs to mobilize everything for an emergency. That cranks up your cortisol. So cholesterol goes to pregnenolone and progesterone. Both of those lead to intermediate hormones, 17-hydroxypregnenolone and 17-hydroxyprogesterone. From there, they go to deoxycortisol and then to cortisol itself. Every cell in the body needs cortisol. In an emergency, it's great. It raises your blood sugar, it suppresses your immune system so that you use all of your capacity for flight or fight rather than building things. So it breaks down proteins, it breaks down sugar in storage forms, and it mobilizes you for an emergency, which in an emergency is a great thing. But when you don't have an emergency, when you have a situation where your body's interpreting it as an emergency in our modern culture, you don't get along with your boss, your job is stressful, you have financial difficulties, there's relationship issues or stress where you're living, and your body interprets that as an emergency, then you have sustained high levels of cortisol. Those sustained high levels can break down muscle, they can change the lining of the gut and the integrity of the gut membrane so that you have a leaky gut. They change the health and the character of the microbiome. They make areas of your brain like the hippocampus, which is important for short-term memory incorporation. They make those areas shrink. So an emergency on a long-term basis is not a good thing. But when your body perceives it's in trouble, it shunts as much cholesterol and as many precursors as possible into cortisol. Now, cortisol has one other thing that can happen to it. It can get turned into the inactive cortisone form. Cortisone serves as a reservoir, and so people who have insulin resistance, they have VAT or visceral adipose tissue, fat around the middle, people with diabetes, folks like that are more likely to have high levels of cortisone. The cortisone serves as a reservoir, and so when cortisol goes down, it gets converted back from cortisone to keep it high. So people in that situation may have sustained higher levels of cortisol. So that's the pathway from cholesterol to your emergency hormone cortisol, which is important at moderate levels for function on a day-to-day basis and is used as an emergency situation hormone for things that come up. The first part of this pathway we're going to break down is the estrogen hormone part of the pathway. Again, things start with cholesterol, and they end up at 3 different estrogens: estrone, estradiol, and estriol. E2, or estradiol, is the strongest of these, the one that's the principal circulating hormone before menopause and is made in the ovaries by women. There's estrone, which is a weaker hormone, and there's estriol, which is also a weaker hormone that comes from estradiol as a less active metabolite. So it starts with cholesterol and goes to pregnenolone and to progesterone. As we said, progesterone is important in both men and women for function of the nervous system. It's helpful for sleep, and it helps with healing of tissues when they're injured. You can go to 17-hydroxypregnenolone or 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Both of those go to the weak androgens DHEA and androstenedione. DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, is an androgenic molecule. It's one of the most common hormones in circulation. It's made by the adrenal glands, and it's a precursor made into a lot of other things. It peaks in around the 20s, and then as you get older, the levels gradually go down. Now, if you just take exogenous or external DHEA, it will improve your sense of well-being. It'll help muscle mass a little bit. There are receptors in the brain that respond to this. And so a lot of times people say, well, take some DHEA, it'll help you feel better. And it might. But the problem with pouring in a precursor molecule like DHEA is you never know where it's going to go. So you pour in a high dose of this. If you're a man, some of it may get metabolized into the estrogens, like estrone and through testosterone to estradiol. And if you're a woman, it may go into the testosterone pathway. So let's say you're a man, you take some DHEA initially, you get a high dose of that in your system, you get more well-being, you may make some more muscle and feel better. But if you metabolize a lot of it into estrogens, you may get some loss of muscle mass, you may get development of breast tissue, you may get changes in emotional situation and how you feel that you weren't expecting. The opposite is true in women, is if you pour in a bunch of DHEA, you probably will get some increased well-being. You might get a little bit of muscle boost, but additionally you can metabolize that into male hormones. And so if you increase your testosterone or some of the other androgens by doing that, you can get acne, you can get deepening of the voice, you can get other changes or even enlargement of the clitoral area. And so there are a lot of different things that can happen by messing with these precursors. So in general, cholesterol through the progesterone pathways go to the intermediates, and then they're converted to the weak estrogen estrone, and then through testosterone to estradiol. That's where most of it happens in the ovaries. It's directly produced as estradiol and released there. After menopause, estradiol comes from aromatization of some of the adrenal precursors, the DHEA and androstenedione, and so there is less of the estradiol and more of the E1 and E2 hormones following menopause. Now let's take a look at the testosterone or androgen side of the pathway. Again, it begins at cholesterol. Cholesterol has the ring structure that can be made into any of the steroid hormones. It always goes through pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the initial sex steroid-related metabolite, and that can be turned into progesterone, into the estrogen family, or into the testosterone and androgens. So from pregnenolone, it can go to progesterone. Progesterone also has important functions in men in the neurologic tissues and also for healing. Both pregnenolone and progesterone have 17-hydroxy metabolites, so pregnenolone goes to 17-hydroxypregnenolone and progesterone goes to 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Those can be converted respectively into DHEA and into androstenedione. DHEA can go through intermediates into testosterone, and androstenedione can go directly to testosterone. So both of these pathways ultimately lead to testosterone. We've talked about DHEA as well having important roles. Both DHEA and androstenedione have testosterone-like effects, but they're much weaker, although they do circulate in high levels because they're some of the main hormones made by the adrenal gland, especially DHEA. It's a major precursor molecule. When we give DHEA from the outside, we get increased well-being because there are receptors in the brain that it fits into and helps with overall feeling and how you're doing. It also helps with muscle mass. But like we discussed previously, DHEA can go unpredictably into different pathways. It can end up as estrogens in men, and it can end up as testosterone in women. So the main pathway from cholesterol to testosterone is through the progesterone metabolites, through the weak androgens DHEA and androstenedione, to testosterone itself. Now let's look at these pathways put back together again. It all starts with cholesterol. So if your cholesterol level is too low, you may not be able to make enough cortisol or any of the sex steroid hormones. So we've set the norms at Destiny Well for our optimal zone at a range where you'll have enough cholesterol to make all of these hormone molecules. They go through the progesterones, and then it goes to cortisol when you need it. Now you need a bit of cortisol all the time, but if your body's either chronically stressed, you always perceive it's an emergency, or you really do go through serious emergencies like a car accident or a major surgery, then the body diverts massive amounts of cortisol on a sustained basis into the flight or fight mode. So it'll take all those precursors and shunt things down to cortisol. That's called the cortisol steal. You take everything you have, you put it into life or death reactions. That leaves a lot less molecules to get turned into the estrogens and into testosterone. So your sexual function, your sexual development, your ability to reproduce, all of those go down substantially when it's a life and death situation. So the more we can send our signals for life and death just when there are emergencies rather than all the time from chronic stress, the better and healthier our other hormone pathways will be. If you have a lot of inflammation in your system, then in women, that turns on the 1720 lyase pathway and converts progesterone into androgen metabolites and testosterone. That's what happens in things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, where the 1720 lyase is turned on. That's turned on by things like insulin resistance and abnormal glucose metabolism. And then it's also true that in men, when there's insulin resistance and obesity and visceral adipose around the middle, fat tissue around the belly, that the aromatase enzyme is turned on. That converts testosterone into the most active estrogen, E2 estradiol. And so men then get estrogen type effects when they're stressed from turning on the aromatase. So overall, we can see these pathways are very closely interrelated. How our stress is, how our precursors are, how the balance in our life is, as well as our glucose metabolism and our body habitus. All these play together to determine the balance of hormones we have and our overall state of health. Testosterone is a powerful and controversial hormone. It's the main male hormone responsible for secondary sexual characteristics, such as development of the genitalia, hair growth, muscle mass, and sexual function. The response to different testosterone levels is highly individual. Some people can have very low testosterone levels and have no symptoms at all, be totally fine in terms of sexual function, and their muscle mass even seems normal. Other people can be high and be in a similar situation where they have no symptoms at all and seem to be totally fine. On the other hand, as a group, when people's testosterone gets below 300 to 400, they often will lose energy, they'll become more emotional, they lose muscle mass, and their sexual function may decline. When men's testosterone gets too high, they may become more aggressive, and they also get side effects such as increased production of red blood cells. This leads to thickening in the blood in a condition called polycythemia that sets you up for increased risk of stroke and heart attack and other conditions when blood doesn't flow appropriately. At Destiny Well, we believe the optimal testosterone range is probably in the 500 to 700 area, and that values over 1,000 are too high, with 700 to 1,000 probably okay for many people, but possibly a little on the high side. In evolutionary times, when people exercised more, had more muscle mass, and ate a higher meat diet and lived more outdoors, it's possible that many men had a higher testosterone level of 700 to 1,000 or even over 1,000. But in today's society, 500 to 700 is a reasonable target because most people feel fine and function fine at that level. 400 to 500 we consider moderately low, and less than 400 is too low. There are a number of diet and lifestyle things you can do that will change your testosterone or boost it without taking external hormones. This graph shows that testosterone varies over time. It tends to peak around age 20, it's going up rapidly in adolescence, and then it gradually drifts down over the years to much lower levels. So peak levels in the 20s are maybe twice as high as they are for people who are 80 or 90. There are natural ways to raise testosterone without taking testosterone hormone. Weight training is a very good one. The more you build muscle mass, the higher it raises your testosterone. HIIT training, or high-intensity interval training, is also good. As opposed to long-range running or jogging, HIIT training is exercising to maximum tolerance for 30 to 60 seconds, resting for 30 to 60 seconds, and then repeating the cycle 7 to 10 times. Avoiding sugar and alcohol helps raise testosterone, as does decreasing stress. As we showed in the steroidogenesis pathways, the more stress you're under, the more the body thinks it's an emergency to make more cortisol. Cortisol is our survival stress hormone. But if you think you're under stress all the time and you keep sending the signals to make more and more cortisol, you have less precursors to turn into testosterone, so your testosterone level is low. And decreasing that stress decreases the signal to build cortisol and leaves more to build testosterone and other hormones. Garlic and avocado can help increase testosterone levels, as can cold showers or swimming in cold water. James Bond apparently did this as a tradition. Also, having sex or sexual activity increases your testosterone as well. There's another important factor in understanding men's hormones. That's called SHBG, or sex hormone binding globulin. This tends to start out moderately low, and then as you age, it builds up higher. Now, why is this important? Well, SHBG binds testosterone tightly. And when it's bound to SHBG, it's not available for use in the cells. So having a high SHBG effectively lowers the available testosterone to your body. At Destiny Well, our reference lab range is 15 nanomoles per liter to 50 nanomoles per liter. Ranges between 20 and 50 are considered normal, and in general, it gets higher as you age, which decreases your free available testosterone. The ratio of total testosterone to SHBG gives an indicator of how much free testosterone you have available to get into the cells. If the ratio is high, it means there's lots of testosterone and not so much SHBG. That means that more of the testosterone is free and unbound and available to get into the cells and exert testosterone-like effects. If, on the other hand, the SHBG is high or the testosterone is low, then that ratio goes down, and that means more of it's bound to SHBG and less available for use. Our reference laboratory ranges are 0.7 to 1.0. This value often goes down with age, but not always, and so in general, higher free testosterone is better. Surprisingly, estradiol is an important hormone for male health and male well-being. Estradiol is the main E2 female hormone, but it also has important roles in men. Estradiol is important for bone density as well as for other types of metabolism. Estradiol, when it gets too high, can lead to the development of breast tissue in men, change fat distribution, change emotions, and other things. And that happens more when someone has increased visceral adipose fat tissue around the middle and when they have insulin resistance. That turns on the aromatase enzyme that converts testosterone into estradiol. On the low end, low estradiol is actually associated with increased morbidity and mortality, which means you have more medical complications and you die sooner. So you need enough estradiol around for your cells to function. At Destiny Well, we define optimal estradiol levels for men at 22 to 30, mildly low at 13 to 21, and low at less than 12 picograms per milliliter. On the high side, 31 to 56 is mildly elevated, and greater than 56 is too high for estradiol. Low estradiol can lead to problems like fatigue and sleepiness, hypersomnia where you sleep too much, changes in sexual function, and it's especially important for bone density. Men need estrogen to form bone. So osteoporosis, which is thinning of the bones, and osteopenia, which is a mild stage of bone thinning, can both happen when you have too low estradiol. High estradiol can lead to decreased erectile function and the inability to maintain an erection, can lead to water retention, as well as hot flashes and insomnia. It can lead to changes in emotion and brain fog. It can also decrease the size of your testicles. DHEA is a hormone produced by the adrenals. It's a hormone precursor that can turn into many other hormones, including estrogen and progesterone. It has mild male androgenic type hormone effects on its own, and since it's one of the most prominent and common hormones in circulation, even mild androgenic effects or mild male hormone stimulating effects can be evident when you have large amounts of it. It's related to muscle mass and vitality, and it can turn into both estrogen and progesterone. We measure DHEAS in saliva, or dihydroepiandrosterone sulfate, because the sulfate form is more stable and gives better reliable readings in salivary tests. DHEA tends to peak around age 20 and then gradually goes down after age 20 as you age. DHEA and the sulfate form DHEAS that's more readily measured in saliva are important hormones because it's a precursor hormone and it's one of the most common hormones produced by the adrenal gland. Like in men, DHEA tends to peak in the 20s and then go down significantly with age until it's only a fraction of the previous peak levels. DHEA has a male androgenic type component and helps muscle mass, but it can also be converted into testosterone or into estrogen or other hormones. So it's important to be careful with giving DHEA supplements because you don't know exactly what they're going to turn into, and they could elevate levels of testosterone in women and cause things like voice changes, enlargement of the clitoral area, and acne, as well as irregular cycles and other problems. The tests included in the Destiny Well Men's Hormone Profile include testosterone, SHBG, or sex hormone binding globulin, calculated free testosterone index, estradiol, and DHEAS. The Destiny Well Men's Hormone Profile provides a good look at the main hormones that are important for a man's health, and even includes the SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin test, so you can see whether more of your testosterone is likely to be tightly bound to protein or free and circulating so that it is available to the cells throughout the body. At Destiny Well, we've been extremely fortunate to find some amazingly good coaches, people with backgrounds of success in varied fields who bring all sorts of resources and talent and skill to help you. These folks have many years of clinical experience, and they know how to be of assistance at every step of the way, from motivation to connecting you with the right resources to finding things that you need to get you on your journey. To learn more, go to destinywell.com/coaching to meet our team and find out how they can be of service to you.